DND number 8, June Flower. In Jesus' name. Chapter 6. I killed them. Still clutching her stomach, she reached out for him with her other hand. He rushed forward. "Oh, no, Jeffy," he said as he scooped her up into his arms. He took her back to dry ground and sat with her in his lap. "It wasn't your fault, sweetheart." I sent them to my tent," she cried. "No, baby, you didn't know. You didn't know. It wasn't your fault. Go ahead and cry, Jeffy. Get it all out." He stroked her back and held her head against his chest. It was several minutes before her sobs began to quiet. Even a few minutes later, when all she had left were soft, hiccuping sounds, he remained still. "I loved them so much," she said quietly. "I know you did, and they loved you." She raised her head. "You knew them too?" "Yes, I've been there with you the whole time. Well, most of the time." She sat quietly while she thought about that. "I'm sorry I broke down on you." "It's okay. You're in mourning. I'm glad you broke down. You needed to get that out." She sighed heavily. "I want to go home, and I intend to get you there." "Just hours away?" "Correct." She shifted slightly and sniffed and looked down and then back up. "I'm totally naked." He chuckled. "Yeah, I noticed." It was difficult to ignore. She glanced up at his face and offered him a timorous smile. "I'd better get dressed." Cameron pushed her to her feet and watched as she strode to the rock and with her usual efficiency of movement donned her clothing. She made no effort to hide her body, and he made no effort to look away. Her body was strong and lithe and well-muscled. She'd never been modest, he thought, and wondered what that said about her. Complete innocence? Maybe complete confidence? It was as if she had no inkling of what her gorgeous self did to a male. She reached into the pack and pulled out a comb and quickly rid her freshly washed hair of tangles. It took her only a few seconds to braid it and put everything back in her pack. He rose and moved forward, picked the pack up, and held it for her. Turning, she allowed this, which told him the hard shell was softening. "We've lost a little time, so we have to move a little faster for the next 2 hours." Jeffy nodded. "You set the pace. I won't slow you down." He smiled. "I know that." Jeffy couldn't look away. For just a moment, she saw the old Cameron, the boy she'd fallen in love with. He still had that sweet, goofy kind of smile. Cam turned and led the way. Grandmaster Keno had been right, he thought. Things between him and Jeffy were different. Put aside the fact that she's confused and mad that he'd left her and hurt her and kept secrets from her. She now saw him in a different light. She had maybe a growing respect for his physical abilities, if nothing else. For now, that would do. They walked silently for some time before Jeffy finally spoke. "I must be crazy." Cam glanced over his shoulder. "Why's that?" "Following you into the jungle." "Right," Cam said with a self-deprecating smile. The teasing continues, he thought, though now his lousy sense of direction had been corrected by the intense training he'd been through over the past 5 years. Cam grinned at Jeffy. "Well, so far, we're headed in the right direction. I think." "You think?" she said, alarm in her voice. "I'm just kidding, Jeffy. Trust me. I know where we're going." "I don't have any reason to trust you, but I'll try." He held some thorny vines up and allowed her to walk past before he took back the lead. Darn it. The minutes of silence this time were a little more companionable. Again, it was Jeffy who finally spoke. "Are you the agent that Hart spoke about? One of Jason's elite who took out the 4 snipers who attacked us in Kampala?" "Yes." "And you've been around the camp the whole time?" "Most of the time. Sometimes I had to leave to make preparations." Preparations like leaving fully loaded packs in the jungle and tying ropes to large trees? He smiled. Yes, like that. So you knew we would be attacked and I'd have to come with you? No, we were being prepared for any eventuality. Trust me, if I'd foreseen someone planting a bomb in your tent, I would have removed it. It was only by some fortuitous circumstance that you weren't in the tent when it went off. Not so fortuitous for the children, she said, her voice somber. No, not for them, he agreed. I can't tell you how bad I felt and how relieved I felt at the same time. Then you knew I wasn't there. I knew you were in Mirembe's tent. Her mind went back to those few moments of terror. I suppose Hart knows I'm with you? He knows the contingency plans. And so does my family? Of course. And how many of them knew you were with me all this time? Cam swallowed. He knew she would be upset that her father and brothers knew what he was up to. They knew she would be angry as well and told him that they would handle that problem when the time came. They weren't worried about winning her forgiveness. On the other hand, he'd have a much harder time of it. Your father and brothers, he answered. All 3 brothers? Yes. My mother? No. So none of the women? Correct. And of course, Uncle Jason. Yes. And Jeff and Keegan. And everyone was told to keep this a secret from me. He sighed. Yes. I'm assuming there is a purpose for that. I'm assuming that somewhere in what you deem as your logical male minds, you all thought it necessary that I not know that this is what you were up to. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, in his defense, your father wanted to tell you. He believes that communication is the key to solving any problem. I know that. Don't you dare tell me what my father believes. Cam nodded. Of course, I didn't mean it like that. I know you know that. And knowing that, can you not see how much more hurtful this is? Yes, I can see it, Jeffy. But he didn't tell you because I asked him to keep my secret, and he gave his word, as did all the others. I see. Well, let me ask you this, Cameron Wallace. Did you decide to play Secret Agent Man after you broke up with me or before, huh? Jeffy, I didn't really break up with you. Jeffy stopped in her tracks, and Cam turned to look at her. Seriously? She said incredulously. He looked down and blew out a breath. Look, I have an explanation for how things went down, but she threw her hands up. You know what, Cam? I'm not really in the mood for hearing your ridiculous excuses, so save it. She stormed past him, continuing in the same direction he'd been walking. Didn't really break up with me, she mumbled. I have an explanation. Well, I'll tell you what you can do with your explanation, she grumbled. Cam caught up. Did you say something? She looked back and glared at him. Nothing you would understand, you Neanderthal. Okay, he mumbled, eyebrows raised as he followed in her wake. He sighed. He'd come a long way, and one of the things he could not do was allow himself to slip into a subservient position like he had been so willing to do in their earlier relationship. Still, he had to be careful in how he showed his strength. You know, he finally said, his voice a little louder than he'd meant, you didn't think I was so Neanderthal a little while ago when you were crying your eyes out against my chest. She turned and opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Her eyes met his. She blew out a breath. Touché. Turning away, she continued down the path. 2 minutes later, though, she swung around. You were at the monastery, too, weren't you? You were the guy in the brown robe. Guilty again. So, where were you when the guy pushed me off the bridge? I was in Turkmenistan, helping with a case. When you went off the bridge, I was called home. It was time. Time? Time for what? Time to fulfill my mission, which was to be your shadow and keep you safe so that you could complete your life's work. He moved past her and picked up the pace. We need to keep moving. Why couldn't you tell me that it was you shadowing me? Why did you feel it so necessary to keep that a secret? She asked from behind. I was going to tell you, but at first you were working so hard on meditating and finding your inner peace, I didn't feel it was right to disturb that. Then your father told me you were really on a roll doing your research and getting your books together, and I didn't want to mess that up. I knew that once you knew I was around, you might feel a little angry, or you might remember the hurt you went through, and I knew that would interfere with your work. And before I ever got the chance to tell you, things happened, and I had to take you away right then. It couldn't be helped. She walked quietly for some time before she spoke again, and when she did, she was much calmer. There's so much I don't understand, so much I want to ask about. He stopped, held his hand up to stop her too. Shh. Jeffy came to an abrupt halt. They both listened. They could hear knocking like someone hammering on a tree. Cam motioned her forward. She moved stealthily to his side. He carefully spread the branches of the low-lying brush. She peered through, and a huge smile made its way across her face. Chimpanzees. It looked like a few dozen of them. They were nesting in the large trees, foraging for fruit and insects. Not at all the noisy, raucous group one thinks of chimps. They were quietly going about their day, playing and eating and interacting with family members. Most chimps in Uganda were in preserves or national parks, so Jeffy was thrilled to find the amazing animals here, wild and free. They were a beautiful sight to behold. They spotted her, but paid her very little mind. She was glad she didn't frighten them. Cam allowed her to watch for several minutes, enjoying her joy and appreciation for life. But it was time to go. Well, I hate to ruin your good mood, Jeffy, but we have to keep moving. Sighing, Jeffy used her mind to bid the chimps farewell. Cam picked up the pace and hurried her through toward their destination. The time and the trail passed quickly for Jeffy, who was using the quiet to examine her feelings about Cam, her feelings about seeing him again. So, he was here with her. He'd been training for years to become one of Jason's elite. His mission was to protect her. Had that been his mission from the beginning? Did he want to come back into her life as more than just a protector? The breakup had hurt her terribly, and no matter what he says, he did break up with her. Oh, they hadn't fought or said ugly things to each other. That wasn't his style, nor hers. Nevertheless, she'd loved him with all her heart, and he'd left her. He'd said he couldn't stay with her. He had things he had to do. He had problems he needed to work out. She'd practically begged him to fill her in, tell her what it was he had to do, and she would support him completely. But he hadn't been interested in that. He said he needed to make a clean break. He had to start over. And she'd been so confused. She fell into a depression and did things she never thought she would do, things that required repentance. She lost confidence in herself, and she handled that by burying herself in two things: her work in medicine and learning more about her psychic abilities. She'd come a long way during those 5 years. Getting into the Association for Psychic Enlightenment Research, meeting with other psychics, and learning what it all meant had been eye-opening. Everyone had the ability to be psychic. It was a matter of clearing one's mind and connecting with God and letting in the knowledge. She hadn't been trying to be psychic, she told them. It just happened. She was born that way. They'd explained that the same thing that qualifies her as a high genius, the using of more of her brain and the synchronization of the two halves of her brain, played a large part in her abilities. That, along with her constant meditations, had freed her mind in ways that most people would never accomplish. However, in all of their instruction, they purposely left out the part about the importance of prayer and talking to God. They did help her to see that her psychic abilities were not a hindrance, but could be used in her medical practice and medical research to see way outside the box, much like Einstein had done. They helped her to understand that the visions didn't come at random with no logic, as she assumed. They came when her mind was free to accept the information, times when she wasn't thinking so hard, like when performing everyday mundane tasks or just before waking in the morning and during meditation. They'd also pointed out that whenever she actually tried to direct and use her gift to read someone's mind or to lift their spirit, she'd been extremely successful. She'd started in earnest after that to use her psychic awareness in her work, and she'd been rewarded by coming a long way fast. At 24 years of age, well, 24 and 3/4, she'd become the youngest person ever to receive a Nobel Prize. And now people wanted to stop her by taking her life, and her old boyfriend wanted to protect her, and she was having a difficult time keeping her young woman emotions out of the mix. Not to mention the fact that people she loved dearly had died less than 12 hours ago. Less than 12 hours. It hardly seemed possible. We're here. She stopped short at the sound of Cam's voice. His deep timbre seemed to have a calming quality about it, and she found herself wishing him to speak again. So now we shoot off flares? He pulled off his pack and unzipped the top and reached inside and pulled out a gun. She thought it would be large and orange-colored, but it was black and small with a wide barrel. He pulled some small silver-colored cylinders from an outside pocket of the pack. Quickly, he loaded the gun with one of the flares and looked up at her. Stay here. Where are you going? I'm going out past the tree line there to find the open field. I'll be right back. She nodded and watched as he hurried away. A minute later, a flare shot high into the air, followed by another. He came back to her at a run, slung on his pack. Let's go. Try to keep up. She didn't argue and ran behind him. It occurred to her that shooting the flares notified more than just Jason's people where they were. And if the bad guys were looking in the right place, they too would see the flares and know that she was still alive and in what direction they'd been moving. Though it didn't seem to matter which direction they'd been moving, for Cam changed headings. Instead of moving northwest like they'd been, he turned northeast. Just 2 more hours and they would be on a chopper and headed home. It seemed too good to be true. New scene. Eric laid in bed, his eyes on his wife as she stood on the balcony outside their bedroom. At the present moment, she was still, merely staring out to sea. For many minutes before, though, she'd paced restlessly back and forth. He wanted to comfort her, but thought she might need this time alone to work things out. If she'd wanted his comfort, he figured she would have turned to him in the dark. As he watched her now, though, she placed the palms of her hands on either side of her head, and he knew she wasn't faring well. He rose. Moving silently up behind her, she only startled briefly when he wrapped his arms around her. Hello, my love, he whispered in her ear. She relaxed and leaned her head back against his bare chest. Eric, you scared me. Sorry. As you must know by now, it's my habit to move quietly. She sighed. I can't sleep. I understand. I wasn't sleeping either, and apparently neither are others in the household. Eric nodded toward his right. She glanced down at the other end of the house. Ricky and Bree stood at the railing of their balcony, staring out toward the ocean. Turning abruptly in his arms, she looked into his eyes. It's after 2. Why hasn't Jason called? I just know something bad is going to happen. It's only 10 minutes after 2. Maybe it's taking a little while for the chain of communication to make its way back to Jason. With all his high-tech equipment, he should know instantaneously, she cried. Okay, you're right. So they're a little late. It's hard to judge time when you're on foot. Shelley's eyes welled with tears. I'm going out of my mind. Sweetheart, try to think only positive thoughts. Jeffy is okay. She's with Cam. They'll be home soon. But how do you know? She said, allowing Eric to wipe at her tears with his thumbs. Well, it's just solid reasoning. Besides, you even becoming pregnant with Jeffy was a miracle in itself. And then somehow you lived through that ordeal with James. Another miracle. Then Jeffy came into the world on a dark and stormy night while we were stranded in that ranger's cabin up in the mountains. And then Tommy took her and she survived and we got her back. Then she got mixed up with Senator Daley and he tried to have her killed. And miraculously, Cam was there to save her. It was a miracle she and Kimmy weren't hurt when they went over the bridge. And it was a miracle she wasn't in her tent when the bomb went off. After so many miracles, I get the feeling that she has a pretty powerful ally. God is with her, Shelley. He has been from the beginning. He has a plan for her. Jeffy is special, and she was born for a reason, and I believe that reason is to help heal the world from sickness and disease. Well, with that reasoning, we should just not take any steps to protect her and just let God take care of it. Eric smiled. You're such a little rebel, Shelley. That's one of the reasons I love you so much. You always seem to see through the BS. I don't know about that. All I know is I can't believe you don't want to take some kind of action. It's not like you to leave it up to serendipity. He smiled. Absolutely, we have to take action ourselves. And God will help those who take what steps they can to help themselves. But we also must trust Him. Trust Him. If we do what we can to the best of our ability and trust Him, then we can expect miracles. Jeffy was meant to be, but also we were meant to raise her and love her and protect her. And we don't want her to give up so that we can't give up either. We don't want her to give up, so we can't give up either. She closed her weary eyes and leaned her head against her wise husband's chest. His arms came around her and offered the warmth and comfort she needed. We'll all get through this, he whispered as he bent to kiss the top of her head. They both raised their heads at the sound of an incoming text. Quickly, they moved inside and Eric grabbed up his cell phone. 2 flares fired. All is well. Rendezvous with Chopper in 2 hours. Breathe. Jay. He smiled and read the message to Shelley. Smiling, she gave a shrill shriek and jumped into Eric's arms. She's alive. She's okay. Oh, Eric. He held her tight. I feel so much better, she sighed against Eric's neck. Good. Now no more negative thoughts, okay? Okay, she agreed, smiling happily. He moved toward the bed and gently set her down. Shelley, girl, when you get all happy and excited, it's just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Beautiful? Not this old woman. Old? You don't look so old to me. The other day, you and Breeze were walking down the beach, and I honestly couldn't tell who was who. You have the body of a 30-something-year-old woman, don't you know? That's why Fit Women's Magazine put you on their cover. It's all you're doing, she said. I haven't gone a week without working out in 26 years. And it shows. Now, shut up and kiss me. New scene. After an hour of running, Ken came to a stop. Drink, he said to Jeffy. Breathing heavy, she nodded but was having trouble shedding her pack. Moving forward, he removed the pack from her back and handed her the water. He then dropped his own pack and drank. We can walk the rest of the way. Another hour and we'll be in the air, he said. Jeffy only nodded because she was having a hard time catching her breath. Cam looked her over, thinking maybe he'd pushed her too hard. She'd been keeping in shape, both at the monastery and at camp, running sprints, push-ups, abs. Still, there wasn't much intensity involved. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded. I'm just a little winded. I can handle it. Cam smiled. Of course she can. She's a Kino. Still, he gave her a few minutes to rest before he issued the order to get moving. He had to give it to her. She was holding her own and not arguing with him at every turn. He supposed her father had something to do with that. She seemed to know when it was wise to keep quiet and follow directions. They walked side by side. The weather was clear and sunny, temperature around 85. He was perspiring pretty heavily. He glanced at Jeffy. She, too, was fairly spent. As a matter of fact, she seemed awfully pale. Jeffy, how you feeling? She bit her lip, maybe a little lightheaded, a little nauseated. Okay, we're going to stop and let you... I can make it. Please, Cam, let's keep going. I just want to go home. We'll go a little slower then. Breathe, Jeffy, and sip some of your water. She agreed again without an argument, which told him that she wasn't feeling very well at all. What do you think is the first thing you'll do once you get back home? He asked. She smiled. His efforts to distract her from her discomfort were blatantly obvious. Well, after I hug everyone and everything, I'm going to take a long, hot bubble bath, eat a huge bowl of chocolate ice cream, and snuggle down into my big soft bed. Ah, yes, the purple room with the purple flowered bedspread. Is it still purple? Actually, it's now more white with only a few splashes of purple as accents. He realized he'd made a mistake as his mind flashed to the times they'd snuck into a room as teens and had a make-out session. He could clearly see her as she would raise her head for his kiss. She'd had no inhibitions, though they'd never toyed again with the idea of Jeffy losing her virginity. He wondered if that had changed. He wondered if him hurting her had made a difference in how she related to men. And then he found himself wondering if she had given herself to anyone, and just how many men there had been since him. Cam? He shook his head to clear it. I said, what will you do when we get back? Oh. He blew out a breath and thought hard. Well, Cam shook his head. Well, that's a very good question. I mean, well, I guess I'll shake hands with your father and brothers and everyone else. And then? I don't know, he said quietly. I guess that depends on... He stopped. On? Man, Jeffy, I don't want to get into this now. On me? Is that what you were going to say? It depends on me? Yes. No. I mean, I've been training for years so that when the time came, I'd be able to protect you. Now that time has come and is almost over. I've been so focused on this mission, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Right now, I'd say your father, your brothers, and Jason, they're the closest thing to a family that I have. And then there's Keegan and Braden and Caleb and Tristan. And of course, Jeff. He glanced over at her. And then there's you. The jilted lover, she said, her brows lifted. Frowning, he shook his head. I didn't jilt you. The definition of jilt, a verb, is to deceive or drop a lover suddenly or callously. I think that word sums it up perfectly. Jeffy, I tried to explain to you that I still loved you, but I had things I had to do. Things like training with Jason. Yes. Why didn't you just tell me? If you loved me like you say you did, why didn't you just tell me what you were going off to do? He swallowed hard. I had to make a clean break of how things were between us. How things were? I thought they were wonderful. Shows what an idiot the silly little genius girl can be, she muttered more to herself than to him. Jeffy, please. How can you love someone and hurt them like you did me? She asked, her voice rising. I wasn't trying to hurt you. You blindsided me, she said, her words tumbling out quickly now. Out of the blue, you sit me down one day and you tell me you have to leave. You said we can't be together anymore. Yes, you said you still loved me. And then in the same sentence, you said that the love you felt for me wasn't enough. You're taking it out of context. I didn't say that I didn't love you enough. I said the fact that we loved each other wasn't enough at that time. That's what I said. Whatever, Cam. You didn't call. You didn't write. You put me completely out of your life. But hey, maybe it was because that's all you know. I mean, I guess that's just the way the Wallaces operate. He stopped and turned to face her. He had to be sure that the hurtful words actually came from her lips and that she really was referring to his parents and the way they had turned their backs on their own son. His eyes met hers, and her defiant stance quickly deteriorated as if she just realized what she said. Oh, Cam, I'm sorry, she said softly. He knotted his lips and pressed tightly together. Apology accepted, he said tersely. We have to keep moving. They walked in silence the rest of the way. Jeffy's mind was whirling a mile a minute, all her thoughts and emotions spinning around in an endless vortex of confusion. He said that what he did when they got home depended on her. Well, he didn't really say that, but he implied it. So what is he really saying? That he still loves her? That he wants her back? That he wants to know if she'll have him back? And if that's what he's asking, then what is her answer? Does she still love him? Does she want him back? She told her mother she'd always love him. Still, he's different now. He's harder and stronger and tougher. He's not the boy she remembered, yet that boy was there just a moment ago when she tossed out those hurtful words. Geez, she felt really bad about that. Her mind jumped from her and Cam's relationship to teaching the world how to end disease and the ramifications of that, to being reunited with her family, to seeing her new nieces for the first time, and back, as always, to mourning the deaths of Mirembe and her children. She was surprised when Cam held his hand up. She stopped. What is it? We're here. He moved out of the tree line and stood aside. Jeffy wasn't sure what she expected. In front of her was nothing more than a circular open field, approximately 100 yards in diameter, outlined by white stones. Off to the left side stood a small cabin with a large crate and two 55-gallon drums sitting along the outer wall. Directly across from where they stood on the opposite side of the field was a small dirt path leading into the woods and, she supposed, toward the nearest village. Standing next to him, realizing their time together would soon come to an end, she breathed a sigh. Cam? Yeah. I'm really sorry about what I said. It was cruel. I don't know what came over me. He shrugged. Look, Jeffy, I get it. Really. I get that I hurt you, and I think I'm beginning to understand that I hurt you more than I realized. And when people get hurt, well, they tend to strike back. They tend to say things or do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. I get that. So don't think another thing about it. She looked up at him and shook her head. No excuses. I was just plain mean. My mother would be horrified. You're human, Jeffy, at least some of the time, he added, trying to lighten her mood. Well, let's get a move on. Are you ready? Cam asked. She nodded, took one step, put her hand to her head, and swayed backward. Cam moved quickly, catching her before she hit the ground. Lying her down, he leaned over her. Jeffy, tell me what's happening, please. Don't go out there, she whispered urgently. Please, don't go. There's danger. Cam knew better than to second-guess her. So, you're not sick. You saw something. Tell me, Jeffy, what did you see? Nothing. I didn't see anything, but I sensed something. Danger. Real danger. She shook her head slowly. I thought maybe I'd lost my gift. Lost your gift, Cam said, peering out at the landing strip as he listened to her with one ear. I never sensed Mirembe's death. I slept right through it. Even worse, I didn't even have an inkling about the bomb in my tent. Not one single sense that anything was wrong. I sent the children to their deaths. Her eyes filled with tears. In the back of my head, I've been thinking that somehow my psychic abilities were gone. What other explanation could there be, you know? But, Cam, I'm sensing something now. There's someone out there. I sense extreme danger. Sighing, he turned back to her and looked into her eyes and finally nodded his head, moved back inside the tree line. He helped her scoot back, then removed his pack. Jeffy watched as he pulled out a weird-looking pair of binoculars. What are those? She asked. FDOS, Fine Detail Optical Surveillance, he whispered. They provide extremely high-resolution 3D images. It makes it possible to quickly identify a target. Stealthily, he moved away from her. Stay here. I'll be right back. Wait, Cam, please. Tell me you won't take any chances. Don't worry. I'll make sure I survive so that I can get you home. That's not what she started, but stopped when he disappeared through some brush. He was angry or hurt still about what she'd said earlier. She didn't blame him. Hopefully, she would have a chance to make it up to him. Suddenly, she realized she didn't hear anything. It seemed all the wild creatures who normally chatter and sing and call away all the time knew something was about to go down, for the forest was amazingly, almost deathly quiet. It seemed to take Cam forever before he came back through the trees from the opposite direction from which he'd left. He sat down immediately, grabbed his pack, pulled a cell phone from a side pocket, and began to load the battery. I thought you said you didn't have a cell phone, Jeffy whispered. No, I didn't. I said we couldn't use one. Well, then why are you using it? Because you're right, we got company. About 20 men, mercenaries, fully armed, waiting for the chopper to appear and see us run out to board, and then they think they will take us all out. Well, what are we going to do? There's too many for me to take on. We go to Plan C. We can't get on that chopper. We got to disappear, Jeffy. She nodded, silently accepting that her trip home wouldn't start today. Well, who are you going to call? And how can we disappear if you use the phone and they trace us? Well, they're going to know we're here or nearby as soon as the chopper appears anyway, so I got to call Jason and try to get him to cry off the chopper. Otherwise, they're going to kill the pilot. Oh, Jeffy said, her face pale. Oh, no. Come on, he said softly, speaking to the phone. Fire up, baby. Give me that signal. Jeffy knew that, like her communication devices, the cell phone wasn't dependent on some cell tower. They were using military satellites for their communications, so there should be no problem. They both heard the distant sound of rotors. Damn it, Cam cursed. He tossed the phone at Jeffy. Take that apart and put it away. He grabbed his pack, pulled out 2 halves of a rifle with a scope, and began assembling it. Only seconds later, he shoved the magazine into place. What are you going to do? Jeffy cried. It's too late to get Jason to call him off, he said as he laid flat on his stomach at the edge of the trees. I got to warn the pilot. Get ready to run, Jeffy. The sound of the chopper rotors grew louder, and a few seconds later, the chopper peered over a ridge. Jeffy held her breath, wondering just how Cam was going to warn the pilot. She knew a moment later when he squeezed off several shots, and the drums near the shed exploded into a large ball of flames. As she stood dumbfounded, watching the chopper turn sharply and hightail it out, Cam disassembled the rifle, threw his pack over his shoulder, and grabbed her hand. Move it, Jeffy, he barked. They took off, Cam in front and Jeffy right behind. Bullets sprayed the ground and ricocheted off trees. Jeffy let out a squeal but kept running. The pace was very fast, and Jeffy was having difficulty keeping up with Cam's longer strides. When the distance between her and Cam started to open up, he ran back to her, grabbed her hand, and forced her to keep up or be dragged. She ran blindly, doing her best to dig deep inside herself. She pictured her father telling her to do 10 more crunches, to jump 5 more minutes, to kick harder, swing faster, you can do it. She forced herself into a zone, chanting a mantra inside her head. Keep going, you can do it. Keep going, you can do it. She had no idea how long or how far they'd run when Cam pulled her through some thick underbrush and came out at a deep gorge. He let go of her hand and she slipped to the ground. Kneeling over her, he removed her pack and held a water bottle to her mouth. She sipped and choked and took the bottle from his hand. He sat beside her and sipped on his own water. Drink slowly, he ordered. Jeffy merely laid back, arms out by her sides, sucking air. After several minutes, she forced herself to sit up. Cameron eyed her. You okay? Don't feel so good, she moaned. Uh-oh, she said just before she turned on her hands and knees and threw up her guts. Cam pulled her braid out of the way and laid it gently on her back, then rubbed his hand over her shoulders. When she finished, he handed her water. Here, rinse your mouth. She did as he said, then eased her back against a tree. Better, he asked. Her eyes closed. She nodded. Sorry. No reason to be sorry. It's nothing I haven't done during the course of my training. She opened her eyes. The training, I've heard Joey say, it's about the toughest a human body can take, and that not many who've tried to become Jason's elite actually make it all the way through. Cam nodded. There were many times I thought I'd rather die than keep going, but then something kicks in. I don't know, a sense of duty, a sense of pride, or maybe just survival instinct. Something kicked in, and somehow I made it through. Jeffy smiled. My father, I suppose he told you that he was proud of you. He did. I can't tell you how good that made me feel. Well, I'm proud of you too, Cameron. He raised his brows in surprise. Really, she added, what you went through, what you've accomplished, I mean, The transformation is remarkable. I have an inkling of what you've been able to endure, how deep you've had to dig. I'm proud of you, and I'm happy for you. Thanks, he said softly. She nodded, looking at his handsome face and hoping the praise undid some of the hurt she'd caused earlier. Not that the praise was empty. Indeed, his transformation was remarkable. So, she said as she drew a deep breath, you said there is a plan C. What is it? He frowned and shook his head. You're not going to like it. Try me. Well, we have to go to ground. Disappear until the coast is clear. If we lay low enough for long enough, the furor over finding you will die down. You mean over killing me? The furor over killing me. It seems they want me dead. Yes, well, that may be what they want, but I'm not going to let that happen. So, are you suggesting we camp out here in the Ugandan wilderness for a few days? He grimaced. No. No? She repeated. Not for a few days. Possibly a few weeks. Her mouth dropped open. I'm sorry, Jeffy. I know you wanted to go home, but I can't let that be in a body bag. The plan is we'll be camping out tonight, then we'll spend the next night in a small cabin on the outskirts of a remote village called Little Kapika. Kapika, I know Kapika. Not Kapika, Little Kapika. Little Kapika. I've not heard of it. I mean, the regular Kapika is little. Exactly. From there, we'll travel south until John comes to pick us up somewhere along our route. John? I take it this John is a Meritech? Yes, you'll like him. All the girls do. He's a good guy. He's an Aussie, and he's very friendly with the locals. And then what? He'll take us into Kashan village, where we will stay until Jason is able to arrange our transportation out. She sat silently digesting what he was saying. She thought that by now she'd be on a chopper headed for an airstrip. She thought by this time tomorrow she'd be home. She felt so much like crying, but she refused to give in. It felt like a giant weight on her chest, and she felt hopeless. He laid a hand on her thigh, and the warmth of his palm seeped into her skin. Sweetheart, you're going to make it home. Things have simply been delayed. She didn't speak for fear the tears would come, so instead, she simply nodded her head. We need to cover several miles before it gets dark, he urged as he stood. Which way? Down there, he answered, pointing to the bottom of the gorge. She peered down the steep, rocky slope to the trickle of the river below. During the rainy season, we wouldn't be able to walk down there, but for now, it's perfect cover. About 4 miles and around a few bends, we'll come to a cave where we can spend the night. Hopefully, it will be unoccupied. Unoccupied? Yeah, like no bats or rock pythons or other lovely creatures. She was too tired to even react. How are we going to get down there? She asked wearily. He smiled. We climb. She watched as he rummaged through his pack, extracted 2 pairs of rawhide gloves with open fingers. He pulled on one pair and handed the other to Jeffy. He loaded his pack on his back and walked to the edge of the cliff and kicked some vines, and finally he bent over and grabbed a thick rope ladder and held it up with a smile. Are you ready? Shakily, Jeffy stood and put away her water bottle, put on her pack, and worked the gloves over her hands. At the edge of the gorge, she looked down and shook her head. Seriously? Are you afraid of climbing down? Cam asked. More like afraid of falling. I won't let you fall. Besides, that doesn't sound like the Jeffy I know. Well, Cam, sorry if that disappoints you, but my body is pretty worn out. Very little sleep, very little food, emotional trauma. As I stood up, I realized my legs are actually shaking. Again, I won't let you fall. I'm going to spoon you the whole way. We'll climb in tandem. You can do it. Blowing out a doubtful breath, she nodded. Okay, lead the way. Cam eased his body over the side and took a strap with a metal hook that was attached to his pack and locked it onto the ladder a rung below himself. He nodded at Jeffy. Let's get going. She backed her way into position just above Cam. He moved down a rung, and then she moved down. When your face is level with the hook, unhook it and hand it to me. Gotcha, she grunted. They made their way down slowly but surely, and by the time they reached the bottom, both Jeffy's and Cam's arms were shaking. The moment she touched down, she turned to him with a huge smile. "We did it," she exclaimed, jumping into his arms. He spun her around, hugging her hard against his body. "We did it all right," he said softly. He set her down and gazed at her upturned face. Man, how he wanted to kiss her, though he didn't dare. Not yet. He was too afraid of messing up their already shaky reunion. Still, he wasn't going to be able to last too much longer before he showed her just how much he cared for her. He rubbed the backs of his fingers over her cheek. "Good job, Jeffy. Come on now. We got to keep moving." New scene. "How's she doing?" Ricky asked as Eric came into the kitchen. Eric shook his head. "She's not handling it very well. She thought she'd wake up this morning and hear that Jeffy was on her way home. She'd planned to get her on the phone." "Yeah, Bree too. She's pretty upset." "I'm making her some chamomile tea. Shall I make some for Shelley as well?" Eric nodded. "Thanks. That's what I came down for." He turned at the sound of muffled voices. Mark and Joey stood on the deck outside the dining room, staring at the ocean and discussing the situation. And Eric moved to the door. "Guys," he said softly. "Eric," they answered in unison. "How's Mom?" Mark asked. "She's not well. Haven't seen her this bad since Jeffy was 7 and Tommy Crane had invaded our lives." Mark nodded. "Did you remind her that Jeffy's with Cam, that she's safe, at least for now?" "I did," Eric answered, "but it didn't seem to make much difference. She won't feel good until Jeffy's home." "Yeah, I'm inclined to feel the same way," Joey mumbled. "Well, I haven't spoken to Jason yet today," Eric said, "so we're on to the next phase." Joey nodded. "Yes, they'll go to ground for a while, and then Keegan and his mates will be flying in. Which means we're expecting to have to make a show of force." "Yes, we're just being prepared. If we have to move, we want to do it quickly, and we want our top men on it." Eric nodded. Jeffy was alive and well. He knew it. He felt it deep within, but he also agreed with Shelley. He felt some inkling of impending doom. The question is, if it's not Jeffy's doom, whose was it? And that is the end of chapter 6.